Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, TJ Mabardi. Today is Friday, June 28th, and the 2024 NBA Draft has officially come to a close, which means we are going to be taking a look at where all these prospects landed, how they fit in, and ultimately whether or not they are going to have a significant role with the teams that selected them. So we're going to be running through every single team and giving out draft grades for each franchise. Really looking forward to this activity here. And then we're going to also be touching on, of course, Bronny James being selected by the Los Angeles Lakers and forming the first ever father-son duo in the history of the NBA, so I'll share my thoughts on that. We will do some last sort of winners and losers of the draft, and then we are also going to be wrapping up the show by just sort of recapping all of the different transactions that may have sort of flown a little bit under the radar with all of the craziness of the draft that went on. But before we do so, just a reminder to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. To any of our viewers, be sure to use the comment section to give us your thoughts on all of the latest happenings in sports. And if you would like to become a bigger part of the show, you can leave a tip or donation at gsmcpodcast.net. If you leave a comment with it, it'll pop up on screen for everyone to see. Anything would be greatly appreciated on that front. So we're going to be diving into some draft grades for each team. We're going to start in the Eastern Conference for both of them. We're going to start at the bottom of the standings and work our way up from there. So first off, we have the Detroit Pistons, who took Ron Holland 5th overall and traded up for the 37th pick, where they took Swedish big man Bobby Klintman. And ultimately, I didn't love this. It kind of grew on me as I settled in terms of the Ron Holland pick was not my favorite fit necessarily for a Pistons team that has all of these talented individual players already, but is Holland going to be able to help contribute to the spacing and such? There was inconsistency there. Now, playing at the G League Ignite last year, he was also dealing with an injury that kept him out the second half of the year, and he was one of the top prospects in this class up until he fell off a little bit with the G League Ignite. Again, I've spoke out about it a couple times. I don't think that the Ignite is the best way to help develop these players. So there's a very real chance that Holland can have a bounce back year here. Klintman is pretty good value for where he got taken at 37th. So again, as I sat on this, I came to like it a little bit more. I'm going to go with B- because I do think that they probably could have gotten a more premier player with their first round pick. And again, I have questions there, but the whole idea is that the Pistons are very confident in their infrastructure of bringing in Vincent, the shooting coach, before they even have an actual head coach, that they are going to be able to develop their players to have outside shots. So we'll see if that does pan out for them. I do think that the Pistons have a very interesting core where it's a lot of players who can put the ball on the floor themselves. Just need to make sure that the shooting actually comes with that. So I ultimately gave them a B-. Next up, the Washington Wizards. I also gave a B- to. This is a situation where I was expecting to actually have them a little bit lower. I am not a fan of the trade that they made of Denny Avdia for that 14th overall pick that they took Bub Carrington, and they got a 2029 first-round pick in there as well, along with Malcolm Brogdon. I was frustrated with the Wizards because, I have this take that I think that just about every team in the NBA has at least one player that is worth paying money to go see. And Avdia was becoming, he did become my favorite player on the Wizards last year. And it felt good that this project player was finally coming through and having the offensive developments necessary to play some real meaningful basketball. And as soon as he does have this moment of shine, they end up trading him for the last pick in the lottery of one of the worst drafts, at least perception wise, in recent NBA history. So the Wizards end up here with 3 young players in Alex Sarr, Bub Carrington, and Keyshawn George that all are on the younger end and have high upsides. So I couldn't bury them for it because ultimately, any one of these players could develop into being a really meaningful piece. I just don't think that there is either the other end of necessarily all too much security. The Wizards are a rebuilding team, so projects was the way they were going to go. We'll see how their developmental program, which hasn't necessarily been the strongest in the NBA, can do with all of these young pieces. The Charlotte Hornets, I gave a B- as well. I know a lot of B- early. It does eventually change up. But they took Tijon Salon with the 6th overall pick and went back to get KJ Simpson, 42nd overall in the 2nd round. Simpson is somebody that I just really liked in college. I'm, not necessarily certain how his game is going to translate to the next level because of concerns with his size, but should be a pretty decent culture setter and somebody who can just set up other teammates in good positions. And those are the types of players that you want to put around Brandon Miller at this point, who had a really good rookie season and is going to look to continue to build on that. Salon is also a very raw prospect as well. Ultimately, it came down to the fact that the Hornets were picking 6th overall, the Spurs were sitting at 8, and there were a lot of reports that Salon would have been a lock to go to the Spurs at 8 if he fell there, and the Hornets clearly fell in love with Salon during this draft process, and they decided that they just wanted to ensure that they went out to get their guy. And ultimately, Salon's a high motor player that Charlotte probably needs at this point. I kind of feel like him and Brandon Miller, and play style wise, we'll have to see. Salon has a lot of developing to do, but Brandon Miller does not really get credit right now in terms of national media for, I think he's an extremely hard worker and he is really determined to turn this thing around in Charlotte. And Salon, at least work ethic wise, I think is going to be matching him step for step. And the Hornets could have a couple guys in the building now that are going to be people you can at least establish more of a winning culture with. So I did like that for the Hornets. Toronto Raptors, I have a B. In a vacuum, I actually liked their draft picks a lot here, specifically Walter and Shed, 2 guards that are kind of on opposite ends in terms of Walter's a younger player with high potential. Shed is just a professional type player. Concerns about his size, being able to be a lead guard in the NBA, but is going to absolutely work on the defensive end and I think be a good leader for a young Raptors team. They also picked Jonathan Mobo with the 31st overall pick, junior out of San Francisco, that can just do a lot of things right. So I initially had them at a B+. Now we're going to get more into the other moves the Raptors have made later in this show, where they did just give out a massive contract extension to Emmanuel Quickley as well, and traded for Davion Mitchell. So it's a lot of guards in the building for Toronto that does sort of have me a little more off of their draft, but I think they got good value, pretty much across the board. The Brooklyn Nets, they did not have a selection, so we're putting them as a not available for this. They, of course, just traded Mikal Bridges to the Knicks in a fallout trade there. They got their own first-round pick in 2025. They're going to be entering tank mode here, and I do think that they are on the right direction. So this wasn't going to be the year for the Nets, but I do think things are going to get better from here. Next, the Atlanta Hawks, I have another B-. B was sort of my standard throughout this process. And when I'm going lower, it's because I feel like things could have turned out better for them. Now, Nikola Jurisic in the second round is pretty good value at number 43. So that did help boost them a little bit in my eyes, but I still just don't love the selection of Zaccharie Risacher with the first overall pick. I feel like they probably should have looked more into trading out. Now, obviously, the value of this year's number one pick isn't necessarily going to, translate to this massive haul in return, but I just don't know if I love it necessarily with Risacher. Now, long term, maybe he can find his way into the starting five here. We saw them trade AJ Griffin yesterday as well, which is another move I didn't really love. So we'll see how it plays out. I don't want to bury Risacher at this point. I'm going to have to see more from him first, but I didn't love this for the Hawks. Maybe I was probably even leaning a little bit more towards the C+ range. For the Chicago Bulls, I have a B+. They had just one selection. It was the 11th overall pick, and ultimately they just went with the best prospect available in Manas Buzelis. And not just that, but the fact that he is a Chicago kid as well, made for a cool moment. Now, the fit isn't necessarily perfect just yet, which is why I couldn't really put it any higher, the grade, but it's interesting. The Bulls are going to have a lot on their plate this offseason to figure out how they want to configure their roster. And ultimately, again, if they are going to lean into this rebuild, which that's what I interpreted it as when they made the Josh Giddey for Alex Caruso trade, if they're going to go in that direction, I do think Buzelis has high upside. With better shooting, could have gone even higher in this draft. So I ultimately, a B+ is a pretty good spot for the Bulls to land at here. The Miami Heat, I ended up giving them a B. Kel'el Ware with the 15th pick and Pele Larson with the 44th pick. Both very solid selections. Now, there are highs and lows that come with both of these. I think that the biggest sort of complaint with the Heat would have been that I think that Yves Missi is a better prospect than Kel'el Ware. Personally, Missi ended up going later in this draft to the New Orleans Pelicans, and the idea is that they decided that Ware was probably going to be a better fit alongside Bam Adebayo, who they just gave a contract extension to, than Yves Missi would have been, because of the fact that Ware is a little bit of a different body type, can provide a different type of intensity as a 7-footer than Bam can, plus he can spread the floor pretty well and additionally. So I think that it's very solid, and both of these players, you talk about the development in that Heat organization. I have faith in them to pretty much develop anybody. Larson was a really good player at Arizona, and I just feel like, people who have some form of success can find a role on a Miami Heat team. So I didn't feel too strongly either way, but very solid selections for the Heat here. The Philadelphia 76ers, I have my first A of the draft so far. They took Jared McCain with the 16th overall pick and Adem Bona with the 41st pick in the second round. And I think that both of these were incredible selections. Where you look at the current situation with the 76ers, they have 3 players under contract. It'll be 4 once they get Tyrese Maxey, but they are going to need to fill out the rotation. And both of these players, I believe, can do so. Having McCain, who has a shot that is already NBA ready and could potentially add a little bit more from a ball handler standpoint. You add in Adem Bona, who is very likely going to be the best backup big that Joel Embiid has had since he's really risen into stardom. Bona out of UCLA, and I really liked that heads-up pickup as well. Again, the 76ers right now are trying to get players that can help them compete, and you get a little bit of an extra upside pick with McCain at just outside the lottery. I have no complaints with what the 76ers did here. I thought they did a great job for themselves. The Indiana Pacers, I sort of went back and forth here between a B plus and an A minus. They got tremendous value for not having a first round pick, taking Johnny Furphy, who for a lot of the college basketball season was seen as a potential lottery guy, falls out of the first round entirely, and the Pacers move up to end his slide at the 35th pick. They bring in Tristan Newton, two-time national champion with the UConn Huskies. They get him at 49th, and then another experienced player as well in Enrique Freeman with the 50th overall pick. I thought that it was tremendous value, again, for where the Pacers were at. Now, I have some doubts. I was never necessarily super high on Furphy when he was getting the lottery pick love during the season. Now, obviously, the end of the season didn't necessarily go quite as well. I mean, he was red hot from three, especially during that stretch where he was gaining a lot of love. But there is absolutely upside with the shot. Outside of that, he just feels like there is a lot of room to grow with him. So having this little bit of a project player with some high upside on a young team with, a little bit of long shot championship odds, I think he plays into what the Indiana Pacers have already established well. Tristan Newton, we'll see how the guard situation plays out for Indiana. I'm not sure actually what the status off the top of my head is with TJ McConnell, but Tristan Newton is absolutely somebody who can step into the building. And I mean, there was a point, and I don't mean to discredit Ben Shepherd because he ended up being pretty solid for them in the playoffs, but there were points in the regular season where Shepherd was getting these closing minutes, and it was a big-time ball handler there. I trust Tristan Newton in that situation more, so I liked a lot what the Pacers did here. The Orlando Magic had just one selection with the 18th overall pick, and they decided to go with Colorado forward Tristan da Silva. Some people have been more negative on this pick than I was. I just like the idea of what they're going for. The Magic are trying to not quite put all their chips in towards contending, but at least shaping up to be a more competitive roster. Obviously just took the Cavaliers to 7 games in the postseason last year. Paolo Banchero is emerging, and Tristan da Silva is a forward that is pretty well-rounded offensively with a high potential of a jump shot. So I think he fits into what they are trying to build pretty well, so I didn't have any complaints here. I was looking at all of the other options at the time. Maybe you go with a Shireman, who is probably a little bit more reliable of a three-point shooter. Filipowski probably could have gotten minutes for them, maybe even an Yves Missi, who is still available at this point. But ultimately, I think it was a solid selection, and I'm not going to bury the Magic for it whatsoever. The Cleveland Cavaliers, I'm also giving a B to. They just continue to take swings here at finding the wing of the future for them. They have their 2 guards. They have their 2 big men. They need somebody to really emerge in that 3 spot. Isaac Okoro did have a pretty good season last year, so you're hoping that he can continue to build on that. But in this spot, taking Jalen Tyson, who has some more on-ball guard experience in college, projects to be more of a forward when he gets to the NBA. And, he's been pretty reliable in catch-and-shoot opportunities. He is a very good athlete, but I'm just not really sure. This could maybe even be a little bit lower if the overall standard I had was maybe more the C range, then this could be like a C+, B-. I feel fine about it, but I'm also just not necessarily sure totally how much playing time he's going to get. He is a junior, so coming in with a little bit more experience, but this is the one where I didn't necessarily know exactly how to feel on it. The Milwaukee Bucks, I have the lowest grade in the Eastern Conference, and maybe even the NBA as a whole, with a C-. They took A.J. Johnson with the 23rd overall pick, and at that point, taking this project player, you were thinking that maybe they double back around in the second round with somebody who's more NBA ready, and instead they go for Tyler Smith out of the G League Ignite 33rd overall. And I don't think Doc Rivers is going to give either one of these players playing time next year. And we saw Andre Jackson, who was a starter out on the national championship Huskies a couple years ago. I thought he showed a lot of promise as a defender, and Doc Rivers pretty much abandoned him. He was getting some more run time when Adrian Griffin was at the helm. Then Doc Rivers takes over and sort of squashes that opportunity. The Bucks are trying to win right now, so I'm not sure what these couple project players do for them. Now, there is some high school recruit pedigree there that maybe they just felt like these were the best prospects available, but I don't know how it necessarily impacts them being a better team next year, and in my opinion, that's where their focus should have been on. Coming into the last couple picks here, the New York Knicks, I ultimately gave them a B. They take Bacom Dadier with the 25th pick, and then in the second round, they start to add a little bit more of at least players that you could see in the rotation this upcoming year. Now, who knows with Dadier? There are a lot of people who are very high on him. I've also heard that there's a very good chance that he ends up as a draft and stash player, so we'll have to wait to see there. But the Knicks coming into the second round, making some moves there to get some non-guaranteed contracts and end up getting a couple veterans of college basketball in Tyler Kolek and Kevin McCullough Jr. that could definitely find roles for themselves. I wouldn't say definitely can find roles. The Knicks are already a pretty deep team. I do like Kolek a lot there, getting some backup guard play out of the position, and definitely think it could be fun there. But we'll have to see how Thibodeau chooses to shake out this rotation. Kolek is definitely not known as a big-time defender, so that might restrict his minutes in a Tom Thibodeau-based defensive scheme. And then the reigning champion Boston Celtics, I gave them a B+, getting Baylor Shireman and Anton Watson with the 30th overall pick and 54th pick respectively. The Celtics, I was surprised they even used their picks in this draft, but they sort of add to this identity that they already have of you have to be a shooter and or defender. And Shireman fits that shooter role a little bit more for them. He is more limited defensively, so we'll see there. Watson is a good defender, isn't a high volume three-point shooter, but still shot 41% his final season at Gonzaga, and there's a very good chance neither one of these guys get playing time this upcoming year for a team that just won the national championship. But I still like the value that they got with both of these picks. Shireman also could maybe be somebody that starts to get more playing time for the Celtics 2 years from now. Sam Hauser is on the final year of his contract right now, and he was, of course, a big rotational player for them throughout the postseason and a three-point specialist. Now, defense is something that I think goes underrated with Hauser's game, so Shireman's definitely going to have to improve on that end of the floor, but could be a little bit of insurance there for that position. But that is the entirety of the Eastern Conference. Let me know what you think I got right and wrong, where you would have changed things up, but we are going to be taking a look at the Western Conference as well and running through all 15 teams there. But first, we have to take a quick break. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits some moosey shit. A stupid myth, you choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody Welcome back as we continue to move along here with our draft grades for each NBA team, and we are going to be continuing on here with the Western Conference, starting from the bottom to the top of the standings. And the Portland Trailblazers were at the 7th overall pick, and they decided to take Donovan Clingan, who is a very solid prospect, and I do like the value here in terms of the pick. The fit with the rest of the roster is where I have some concerns, considering the fact that they already have DeAndre Ayton and Robert Williams III, which they traded for, both of them last year, and I would imagine there's going to be another move coming, but at the same time, I don't know how much value Ayton or Williams have, so we'll have to see there. Now, I prefer them to create a little bit of a logjam at the center position as opposed to the guard, where for years now they have been sort of struggling with how to develop their young guards, considering the fact that Damian Lillard was in town and they couldn't necessarily get their full run time. You know, of course, Anthony Simons is the big one, but now with Scoot Henderson as well and Shaedon Sharpe, there are a lot of guards there already that are pretty raw in some ways, and I wouldn't want them to make it any more complicated there. Clingan can be a part of their future, and I do like it. Now, that being said, I wonder if they could have gotten a pretty nice trade package from the Memphis Grizzlies, who we'll be talking about very shortly here, and they were determined to get a center in this draft. Clingan was the number one on the board for them in that department, so they ultimately decide to stick, and I think that it's a fine decision. Just curious what would have also been on the table for them. The San Antonio Spurs, I am giving an A. They potentially got the best player in this class in Stephon Castle at the 4th overall pick. Whether he is or isn't, I still think it's going to be a great fit alongside Victor Wembanyama. Now you have that elite perimeter defender along with the elite paint protector. Now, don't want to throw elite out there sort of nonchalantly, but I do really think that there is high upside with Castle on the defensive end, and he has point guard skills. I would love to see him be able to become a primary creator, but even if he doesn't necessarily, they also picked up Juan Nunez with the 36th overall pick in the 2nd round, point guard out of Spain. Also a young guy who is known to be a very good facilitator of the pick and roll offense. Just having another guard option for Wemby to just make the simple passes that Wemby needs, I think is a huge plus for him. And then you also add Harrison Ingram out of North Carolina as somebody who can maybe be a little bit more NBA ready, could have a three-point shot at the next level. I loved this draft for the Spurs, and they are definitely one of the big winners in my eyes. The Memphis Grizzlies, this is another one where I really sort of went back and forth on what to give them for a grade. I ended up on a B+. I'm not 100% sold on the Zach Edey selection at number 9. It's just a situation where he doesn't necessarily feel like, a high lottery player, but at the same time, he fills a big need and a hole in the roster for the Memphis Grizzlies, who, like we just talked about, were set on taking a center in this year's draft. So that's ultimately what they get. I see Edey of being a little bit more of a backup than a consistent starting option, but again, they're going to have to work out exactly how they want to run their roster. Maybe they even go Jaren Jackson Jr. as the 5 instead of the 4 where he's been playing most of his career. So we'll see there. But Edey can provide at least a little bit of a wrinkle, when they're... Because the Grizzlies are hoping to be back in the playoffs this upcoming season, and there are going to be teams in the West that have some size. You look at Jokic, Anthony Davis. You can even throw a little bit of the Timberwolves in there with Karl Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert. Zach Edey is going to have to improve defensively. He can probably be more aggressive on that end now that he doesn't have to basically handle every single possession himself like he did at Purdue his senior year. But ultimately, definitely a polarizing player with Edey, but the reason why I had to go on the higher end with this draft grade was because I loved the selections of Jalen Wells and Cam Spencer in the second round. Wells from Washington State, Spencer, of course, from UConn and that championship team. Spencer and Edey actually have a little bit of a history of chirping back and forth, so that'll be interesting. I'm sure it'll be water under the bridge, but I thought this shaped into a really nice draft class for the Grizzlies, and I don't expect them to be finals contenders immediately this season, but they got some nice pieces that could potentially help add to their rotation, so I liked what they did here. The Utah Jazz I had as an A-, and the Jazz are one of these teams that I feel like are kind of going under the radar a little bit in terms of they're just kind of moving at their own pace a little bit in no man's land, but more so on the, you could say, tanking side. But Danny Ainge is their general manager, and he has always had a philosophy of just make the best move possible in the moment. We'll figure out the rest of the details later. He has also had a thing for prospects that have a high pedigree coming out of high school. And you're looking at three guys here in Cody Williams, Isaiah Collier, and Kyle Filipowski. All of them were top 7 recruits in the past 2 high school rankings. It was Collier as the number 1 in 2023. Williams was number 7 in the Cody Williams was number 7 in the 2023 class, and Filipowski was 7 in 2022. So Ainge was building up on sort of high pedigree guys, and I think that they did a really good job. Not sure where they're going to move on from here. We're going to talk about the Jazz a little bit later in the show, but ultimately I thought they got a number of really good prospects for a young team, so I gave them an A-. The Houston Rockets had just 1 pick at 3rd overall, and I think they nailed it. No complaints here. Could even be an A+. Reed Shepherd is one of the best players in this class. I think he's so safe to be an impact player. The high-end potential is where you maybe draw some concerns, but ultimately, I think that he's going to fit in very well to what the Rockets are already doing here. So I think they made the perfect pick. Again, maybe even could have been an A+ as my grade, but that's just kind of all I have to say on it. He shoots, he can ball handle a little bit. Defense is where he's going to need to improve a little bit more, but ultimately I think this is a no-brainer selection here. The Golden State Warriors took Boston College big man Quentin Post with the 52nd overall pick, and it just feels a little bit underwhelming. I gave it a C-. Now, ultimately, I don't think the Warriors really had a move out there that was going to automatically make them, a contender once again. Post is interesting. He's a 7-footer with 3-point range, so maybe they can sculpt something out of him. I think that he has a lot to work on in terms of, I can't imagine they would even be using him as a post presence, but he has virtually none there. And defensively, I don't know if I necessarily trust his mobility. So we'll see. I was kind of thinking that Post was maybe a selection in case they try and make some other type of move that, again, we're going to get to later in the show, that maybe he could just be a backup option for them in terms of if they end up losing another big man. But I gave them a C- because, again, I don't know if Post is ever going to translate to an NBA talent. The Warriors were limited on picks, limited financially, so I'm not going to kill them for this selection, but it does feel a little bit underwhelming. The Sacramento Kings also just 1 pick, Devin Carter, 13th overall. I do really like this pick for them. I think that Carter is probably a little bit of the higher end version of what they were hoping for with Davion Mitchell when they took him in 2022, I believe, was the class that he came out in. And I think that he's going to provide the defense, the playmaking on offense. He's just a dog. He works extremely hard. And I mentioned the Davion Mitchell comparison because the Kings traded Davion Mitchell ahead of the second round yesterday, probably to make some more room for Devin Carter in this situation. I stand by it. I think it's the right decision. And, there's these rumors that Fox is waiting on seeing what the Kings do as to whether or not he's going to re-sign with the organization. But I think it's a pretty good pick, if you ask me. And I expect Fox to be back there. And I like the core that the Kings have right now. Is it championship contention level? I'm not quite sure about that, but I think this was easily the right move for them at 13. The New Orleans Pelicans, I'm also giving a B+ to. Yves Missi was one of my favorite, maybe high potential prospects in this class. I just feel like he has a very high motor. He can mess things up in a good way, that is, on the offensive and defensive end, specifically in the paint. Just be a rim runner. And the Pelicans, we know they like to play with pace sometimes. I like the idea there. Now, is he going to be able to come in and immediately impact winning is the question for the Pelicans, who are in need of center help. Jonas Valanciunas is a free agent this summer, so we'll see whether or not they end up bringing him back, how much playing time Missi does get. But in the long run, I like this move. They also get Antonio Reeves for the 47th pick. Reeves he had a pretty disastrous tournament appearance in 2023, but he was one of the better players for Kentucky this past year. I believe he averaged 20 points per game, and not bad value here to just get a potential scorer late in the second round. The Los Angeles Lakers, I'm also going with a B+. Of course, one of the main storylines was the Bronny James situation, but the B+ is for Dalton Knecht at 17th because I feel like he's somebody who can legitimately impact winning. I thought he should have been a lottery pick. I still feel like his game has room to grow throughout the course of the next couple years, despite the fact that he's already 23 years old. Our boss here at the GSMC Sports Network, Andrew Tate, feels like the Lakers could potentially look to move Knecht in hopes to find a third star, but I love the idea of him operating in a JJ Redick offense. I think that there are almost some similarities there between JJ and Dalton Knecht. Dalton Knecht, though, is also going to be a top-end athlete as well. So I think he's going to fit in great with the Lakers. I hope they don't move him, but at the same time, as a Celtics fan, if I were to try and root for him, it might be a little bit easier if he's not wearing a Lakers jersey, but I'll root for him regardless. Phoenix Suns, I thought had a really good draft here considering the situation that they were in. Ryan Dunn, they traded down with the Nuggets from 22 to 28 to land here. Dunn is the best defender in the draft class in my eyes. Now, obviously, there is still a concern in terms of what does he bring you offensively that might take him out of the rotation entirely for the Suns, but he has an elite asset, and I'm hoping that they find a way to be able to utilize it, especially when they already have the individual creators. I don't think it will hurt them quite as much in the coming season, but we will see. And then Oso Ighodaro is another player, experienced out of Marquette, has a little bit of size with some playmaking capabilities, can play into a team environment, and not ever going to be, a creator necessarily, but I definitely think he can be a solid option on both ends of the floor. And if the Suns are trying to improve their ball movement this upcoming year, Ighodaro could be a good facilitator in that sense. The Dallas Mavericks had just one pick. They actually traded up into this pick to take Melvin Aginsa, who is a prospect out of France. Truthfully, I don't know a ton about him. There's a very good chance, it sounds like, that he doesn't end up playing for Dallas. Now, again, I don't want to, talk down or praise him when, truthfully, this is just a prospect I don't know all too much about. But I think ultimately for the Mavericks, taking a potential draft and stash guy that could develop in the coming years, especially considering how much draft capital the Mavericks have given up, that if you can take a swing at somebody who is going to provide some long-term pros for you, I think that's a pretty good strategy for the Mavericks, who are going to look to continue contending. The Los Angeles Clippers, I gave a B+. They took Cam Christie out of Minnesota, just 18 years old. Little bit interesting subplot is the fact that now we have Cam Christie and Max Christie, who was selected last year by the Lakers, opposite sides of town, as a sibling rivalry, you could call it. But Christie is a really good player for the Clippers, and again, he's just 18 years old. We'll see whether or not he actually cracks the rotation this year, but I thought this was excellent value for him at 46, and who knows where the Clippers are going to go from here on out. Of course, all of the Paul George rumors are circulating right now, but I think that Christie is a pretty good pickup here. Minnesota Timberwolves, I gave them an A- for their 2 first-round selections of Rob Dillingham and Terrence Shannon Jr. The trade up for Dillingham was probably the biggest move of the entire draft, and I understand some concerns defensively, but I love the fact that they got aggressive here and weren't just kind of happy to play it out, see how next year works out, and work from there. They took immediate action, did so with a very low price point as well to go get Dillingham. 2 picks in 2030 and 2031. Those players that are eventually going to be selected are currently in middle school, and you get Rob Dillingham, one of the top prospects in the draft here, and somebody who can give a real supporting role for the Timberwolves. Terrence Shannon Jr., we'll see about the reliability of the shot. I think he can play in transition. He can play defense. He's got size, so maybe he cracks the rotation, but really fun player. Maybe I'm just overrating these picks as well. I understand that just from an aesthetic standpoint, I loved watching these two play in college, so ultimately I decided to go with A- here. The Denver Nuggets, just 1 pick. They traded up with the Suns to get De'Ron Holmes. And this is, I just mentioned this with Embiid, this could be the best backup big that Nikola Jokic has ever had since, emerging as the superstar that he is. Holmes is a very talented, skilled big man that played 3 seasons in college. His final one at Dayton, helped lead the Flyers to a postseason appearance and even a win in the NCAA tournament. So I like this move a lot for the Nuggets. They had to give up some second rounders, but they also made those up as well by trading Reggie Jackson. So ultimately, I think that this is a player that could maybe be a low-end rotational player. I think he can play over Zeke Naji, who has sort of been the number 1 backup big for Denver these past couple years. And then the final team here, number 1 overall seed from the West last year, the Oklahoma City Thunder. They make 3 selections of Nikola Topic, Dylan Jones, and Ajay Mitchell. Mitchell, by the way, just super fun highlight reel, to say the least. Don't know whether or not he is going to actually make it into this Thunder organization, but a fun pickup there. Topic going to miss all of his, what would be rookie season. He'll be a rookie in 2025, 26 now, if that adds up. And Dylan Jones, both of those prospects in the first round are going to have to improve from a 3-point shooting perspective to really become effective in the Thunder organization right now. But I think both of them can play into what the Thunder do, which is a lot of ball movement, a lot of switchability on defense, and I like the fit for them, so I'm going to give them a B, and that is all 30 teams. Took a little longer than we were hoping, but ultimately, let us know in the comments section whether or not you think we got your favorite team right, as we are going to have to speed it up a little bit down the second half of this show. So we're going to be taking a quick break, and when we come back on the other side, we are going to dive into the Bronny James draft selection by the Los Angeles Lakers. So stick with us, and we will be right back after this quick break.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast as we continue on our coverage of the 2024 NBA Draft. And one of the biggest storylines, maybe won't be the most impactful from an actual basketball standpoint, but the Los Angeles Lakers drafted Bronny James with the 55th overall pick to pair up the first ever father-son duo in NBA history. And it's really interesting how the whole situation played out. First off, this was the first time we've ever seen the NBA go to an exclusive day show for the second round alone, which was a little bit weird. Ultimately, I mean, I understand that they are just they're trying to follow the NFL type situation where they maximize the amount of time that they can take up on air to bring in viewers and sell advertisements and such. I don't think it really worked. It was really strange seeing the way that they had the studio. Somebody made the comparison to kind of looked like the 2020 draft, but just without the masks. And I don't know. Ultimately, I mean, I'm going to watch because I'm a big basketball fan, and at least in this new sort of experiment, I'm going to follow along. But it is definitely a very strange way that this went about, and especially in a draft that not a ton of people were charged up about coming into this year's draft. And the fact that the crew there talked about Bronny James and whether or not he was going to be drafted for the first 5-10 minutes of the coverage. And again, I'm talking about it right now, so I understand I might be part of the problem, but it's just not the most impactful move by any means, especially when you talk about all of the other players that are available. And they went on about it for a while. And then there was the whole fact that Bob Myers, who has done a terrific job since joining ESPN. I do really enjoy listening to his insight, but Bob Myers said that he was going to have this big news and that he was going to wait 30 or so minutes, and then it's 30-45 minutes into it and everybody on the panel is like, so what news do you have for us, Bob? And he announced the fact that Rich Paul and Bronny's agent, Rich Paul is of course Bronny's agent, that he was calling these other teams and telling him not to draft them, otherwise he's going to go play in Australia. And that type of leveraging does happen in the NBA, so it's not like it's this entirely unprecedented thing. But then the broadcast also sort of almost lectures us, and Adrian Wojnarowski, of course, does wonderful work, but the idea of, I don't want to hear about nepotism because nepotism happens in sports. I don't think anybody said that it doesn't. And nepotism happens everywhere in life, in the business world. So we can say that, yeah, it's happened in the past as well, while also acknowledging that's absolutely what this is. Bronny would not have been drafted if it weren't for the fact that he's LeBron's son. And again, then when they're putting out these quotes about the fact of Bronny, the number one thing for him is he just wants to hear his name get picked. But he's turning down all of these different workout opportunities. And I don't know, it's just kind of own it if that's what you're going to do. And it makes for a really special moment. I'm looking forward to seeing Bronny and LeBron potentially on the same court playing with one another. I wasn't old enough to watch Ken Griffey Jr. and his father play baseball together, and that is one of the more, heartwarming, exciting sports dynamics that we have seen in recent history. So I'm not opposed to Bronny being drafted by the Lakers, but it was just kind of weird the way that this all played out in terms of, we're supposed to kind of bubble wrap Bronny, and I don't think that I've been overly critical of him. I've said I don't think he's an NBA player, and I don't think that he would have, gotten the same opportunities if it weren't for him being LeBron's son, which again, nepotism exists in life, so it's not the end of the world. But the fact that we're supposed to feel bad also about the idea that we are acknowledging what's happening, it's this whole weird thing that sort of went on, and I don't know, I thought the coverage of it was very strange. But, ultimately, Bronny ends up with the Lakers, and I would imagine he's probably going to spend some time in the G League. When he was first coming into the pre-draft process, he talked about the fact that Rich Paul said he's not going to sign a two-way contract and that he wants everything to be fully guaranteed. Going to be interesting to see how they play it out there. Bronny would be better off getting more hands-on experience in the G League, in my opinion, than he would sitting on the bench for the Lakers just there because... And the difference is, I don't know, as much as, again, this whole nepotism conversation, people can say maybe Bronny has so much of an upside. Thanasis Antetokounmpo has been, I don't want to say a laughingstock. Like, he's also kind of like a fun guy too. He has his own podcast and everything, and some of his on the court antics have been a little bit funny in the past, but I don't think that, Thanasis has been forcing his way to stay on the NBA roster, and I don't think anybody ever really thought that he had the upside even of what the perception that Bronny could be in the NBA. The idea is that he could be, the same type of play style as a Derek White or a Davion Mitchell, and who knows, maybe. But if that's going to come into place, I think he needs actual reps of being a primary, not even just a primary ball handling guard, but at least an option that's actually getting in-game reps and is learning from them. And I don't see the benefit to that if he's just going to sit on the bench all season long. So, I think that, again, ultimately, there was zero surprise that the Lakers were going to take him. I was curious during this whole idea of Rich Paul is calling everybody and saying, don't take him where he goes to Australia. I think it would have been so funny if somebody ended up taking him, and seeing what the fallout of that would have been. Now, it did seem like Clutch, which is the agency that he is a part of, did seem like Clutch was sort of flexing their muscle a little bit in terms of, don't mess your relationship up with us right now because we have a ton of other notable clients out there in the NBA, and it's going to come back around to hurt you, which, I don't know, again, it's just when you're sort of playing this intimidation game, and, there are a number of these teams that probably would have never is maybe dramatic, but like, we're not planning on drafting Bronny whatsoever anyways in the first place. So to then have them going out of their way to do this, again, I'm not saying definitively it's the wrong way to go about it, but then for ESPN to also sort of get us to say, like, trying to almost say, well, you can't be too critical of this because this has happened before. I mean, maybe, but it's obviously just going to be, supersized because of the fact that it's LeBron James and his son. And I don't know. Again, all of it's just so messy. At the end of the day, people are going to think what they're going to think. I'd like to see Bronny actually, start playing. And now that he's officially on the Lakers, it seems like we can actually kind of turn this into more of a basketball discussion in terms of, all of this dramatic lead up that we had over the, past number of months or so, even go back a year, and sort of all the debates that have taken place there. Let's just see how he plays. That's what I'm most curious for. And, I think that the main opportunity to see that is going to be in the Summer League, I would imagine. So a little bit of a countdown until then, but let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section. Again, I don't think that the basketball conversation around this has been very nuanced, which is why I'm looking forward to sort of turning the page on this. But again, if you have any thoughts, be sure to let us know, as we're going to be taking our next break here, and when we come back on the other side, we're going to get into a little bit of just the general winners and losers from this draft. I know it's pretty similar to what we did earlier, but a more condensed version of that. So stick with us, and we will be right back after this quick break.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC. To access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast as we continue on here with some 2024 NBA draft conversations. And here I want to break it down into, again, a little bit of a generic activity here, but winners and losers of the 2024 NBA draft. And I'm going to try and maybe stick away a little bit from traditional, teams as a winner or a loser. The number one winner I have is Victor Wembanyama, who the number one storyline that I was looking forward to in this draft is, what are the Spurs going to do to build around Wemby? And there was a very clear need to have enhanced guard play after a little bit of a mess in San Antonio last year. And they start out by getting Stephon Castle, who is somebody, it is a little bit unclear whether or not he is going to be an actual traditional point guard for them, but has the potential to, and immediately is going to complement Wemby in terms of the defense, where we saw the horrendous numbers for the Spurs defense when Wembanyama was off the court, and that he was kind of just carrying a very lackluster group on his shoulders. And now he has Stephon Castle to sort of lock down the perimeter a little bit more for him. And it's a team effort. It's not like you can just put two players on a defense and automatically they are going to, the whole team is going to get better. But I think it's a great start. Again, defensively, plus the upside of what Castle could be on offense. But they also add to that as well with their other second-round picks that I think also complement Wembanyama pretty well in adding Harrison Ingram with the late pick, and then adding the point guard from Spain as well, Nunez, to be able to just provide a little bit of extra spacing for Nunez, a little bit more ball handling, some increased point guard play. We'll see how they choose to divvy up the point guard minutes, but again, just having people on the roster that can make the basic passes and plays that Wembanyama needs, because he was kind of doing a lot of it by himself last year. So I definitely wanted to see them go with a guard. And when they initially passed on Tyler Kolek in the second round, they were picking 35, and I was a little disappointed that they didn't get Kolek. Kolek is somebody that, at least personally, me, who watches college basketball a lot, that I, am more familiar with him, and that I thought he would have been. I think he's maybe one of, if not the best pure passer in the NBA alone. But for them to still be able to go out and get Nunez, who, again, from Spain, I don't necessarily have quite in-depth of a knowledge of what he can bring, but he is well regarded as an excellent playmaker. And again, just having any sort of additional guard help is going to be beneficial for Wembanyama. My next winner, I have Danny Ainge. Talked about this a little bit earlier in the show, the fact that Ainge has been in a position as a GM for a number of years since he was with the Celtics, that he just wants to make the right move no matter what that is, excluding the idea of what is the state of the current team. Just in a vacuum, is this the right move for us right now? And it seemed like that's kind of the way that he went about in this year's draft. Again, going for all of the high pedigree high school recruits that have, I would say still on the younger side. Now, Filipowski, he was a sophomore this past year, so he has a little bit more experience, of course, and but he was the 7th overall recruit in 2022. You add 2 top 7 guys in Cody Williams and Isaiah Collier in the first round as well. I have sort of no complaints for Danny Ainge here. Now, again, there are still a lot of things to come here for the Jazz. Danny wants to basically win every single transaction that he makes, and there's going to be a big decision to come in terms of what to do with Lauri Markkanen, who I would imagine is going to be sought after this summer in terms of a player that could very much be available and I think has a real winning impact on a number of teams. And that's just something I would keep an eye out for. Will be interesting to see, sort of, because I don't know, if off the top of my head, ranking who is the better player of Lauri Markkanen and Mikal Bridges, I think it's really close. Now, are the Jazz going to be able to get 4-5 first-round draft picks out of that? I would have to assume probably not, so maybe Ainge is going to look at that, assess what he believes the current market value is, and sit on it, but we will see how he chooses to go about this as a whole. I consider the Trailblazers winners out of this, considering the fact that they got, a very solid player in Donovan Clingan, who I just believe is going to have an NBA career. Now, is he ever going to be an all-star? I would probably lean no, but I feel like he can be what DeAndre Ayton is, and maybe even a little bit better. And Ayton was once regarded as one of the most promising up-and-coming players when he was with the Suns in those first couple years that they started competing, and call it, 19, 20, 21. There was gradual improvement, and I think one of the big things that sort of tore him down was the fact that the idea of his work ethic and him being locked in wasn't necessarily there. I think there's a different story with Clingan, where I do believe that he is somebody you can sort of have be a main cog in your overall foundation of the intensity you work out with and such, and, has some championship experience, played under Dan Hurley. So, he knows what it takes to win, at least on the collegiate level. Now, obviously, far different story when you get to the NBA, but at the same time, I think that he's going to be somebody that Trailblazers fans can feel good about. Again, they are going to need to figure out that big man rotation and probably move somebody out of Ayton and moving on from Ayton, Robert Williams, or who knows, maybe they pull off a crazy trade with Clingan. I kind of doubt it. But, they make that pick in bringing in Clingan. They also get Deni Avdija, who I've been talking about it for the past couple days. I feel like that's a very promising piece to have, still at just 23 years old, despite the fact that he's been in the league for, 4 years now, that he is finally showing some consistency on the offensive side of the ball. He's never been a selfish basketball player. I really do think that he can, contribute to winning in terms of moving the ball around. And again, 37% shooting splits on 15 points per game last year. That is really impressive for him from where we were at coming into the NBA. He's a fine playmaker, and he's a really good defender. So that's an option. If they were to look to potentially trade Jeremy Grant, I could see Avdia very easily, and maybe even if Grant's still there, having Avdia in the starting lineup, maybe going a little bit lengthier. But I really did like that addition for the Trailblazers, so I wanted to give them credit for pulling off that deal. And moving on from Malcolm Brogdon, who was just crowding the locker room and the guard space when he was with Portland. So that was an easy decision. And you're giving up the 14th overall pick in this draft? I think that's nothing. And I would much rather have Deni Avdia than whatever options were available to them at 14th. But I do have a couple losers here. The Milwaukee Bucks, just considering the fact that I can't get over the way they chose to go about this unless they think that A.J. Johnson and Tyler Smith are both going to be able to have this trade value because they're these young developmental pieces that maybe they make another deal, cheap contracts to throw in a deal. There have been Brook Lopez rumors, pretty much main Brook Lopez rumors. There's been maybe a little bit of noise about could Chris Middleton go. I would assume probably not, especially after the flashes that he showed in the playoffs series against the Indiana Pacers last year. But I just did not like the way that they chose to go about this, of taking two players that Tyler Smith probably has a better chance of contributing the first couple years, but Doc Rivers doesn't like playing young players. We saw that last year with Andre Jackson, and you're going to sort of double down on these inexperienced types. Doc Rivers, I'm curious what his, role was in this decision making, because it's so uncharacteristic of what he's done in the past, and I don't believe it makes them any more competitive this upcoming season, where it feels like maybe the window is a little bit shorter than we had initially thought. Who knows? Definitely a bunch of different ways that you can sort of a couple ways you can look at this deal and choose to judge it. But final loser of this is the NBA. The year-to-year draft production is just such a mess. They need to find a way to be able to actually, I don't know if it's even, the fact of just putting a cap on you can't trade for players once they're selected, at least on draft night. I don't know. I know that sounds stupid off the top of my head, but the way that we have all of these players going to put on hats of other teams that we already know they're not playing for, and that you sort of have to do this extra level of digging, because if you just look at the overall draft board, you're going to have all of these different players, especially when you get to the second round, where basically every pick was traded, and Malika Andrews, it sounded like she was scrambling for her life to some degree. She knows it's ridiculous. Adam Silver, when he was announcing the trades in the first round, when he was up at the podium, he was laughing to himself, giving these shrugs like, yeah, we know that this is wrong, but this is the way that we do things, so we're going to announce that, Rob Dillingham is no longer a Spur 7 picks after he's been moved and we already knew he was on the Timberwolves. All of it's just so ridiculous, but, that's just me as a viewer wanting a better experience. I think that it probably mirrors the way that a lot of people feel. I don't know what the fix is, but they have to find a way to do something better. And also the fact that there is very little analysis, it feels like, in terms of how they actually fit into, the roster and what that looks like. It doesn't feel like there's all that much analysis there. Again, maybe that's something that I personally am on my own island with, but I just feel like the NFL draft does such a better job. And if the NBA is going to lean into this 2-night event of the draft, then probably up the production there and make it something that people are actually interested in, because it was a little bit of a disaster. But let me know your winners and losers for the draft. We're going to be taking one final break here, and when we come back on the other side, we are going to dive into just the transactions that have taken place over the past 48 hours or so. Some of them maybe flying a little bit under the radar with all the madness that has been going on. So stick with us, and we will be right back after this quick break. Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. As I just want to sort of fly around here the NBA landscape after the NBA draft, because there were a lot of supplemental moves that went down that sort of got caught up in the madness of everything else that was going on. So I want to dive into just sort of a little bit of housekeeping, you could call it. And we'll start with the, of course, 2024 runner-ups, that is, in the Dallas Mavericks, who this morning agreed to a trade with the Detroit Pistons that I was actually a fan of. They moved Tim Hardaway Jr. and 3 second-round picks in exchange for Quentin Grimes. Grimes, of course, spent his first couple seasons with the Knicks, was moved in that Bogdanovich and Burks trade at the deadline. And Grimes is a very solid player, and one that I think can fit into what the Mavericks need. They just need a couple more supplementary pieces that they feel like they can actually have some level of offensive production and be able to knock down open three-pointers. Now, once Grimes went to Detroit, the efficiency fell off drastically. He's a career 37% shooter from three. Last year, in the games that he played with Detroit, which granted were limited, he only shot about 17% from three, or 14% that is from three. So I would imagine it's going to be a bounce back. He shot 36% with the Knicks when he was there for a much larger sample size in 45 games. So I like this pickup for the Mavericks, where Tim Hardaway Jr. was set to make $16 million this coming season and was pretty much not playable for the Mavericks through the second half of the season, including the playoffs, other than whatever it was, one big third quarter or something that he had in that Thunder series. But I like this move for the Mavericks. Obviously have more pieces to come here, but a little bit of a solid pickup here that isn't going to get all too much attention. We also saw a couple other of these sort of small trades take place right before the second round. Yesterday, the Rockets acquired A.J. Griffin in a deal with the Atlanta Hawks. They traded the 44th pick. The Hawks ended up trading that to the Heat, where they used to take Larson. So the Hawks got some future, second round draft capital. Sold very low on Griffin, who was the 16th overall pick in 2022. I suppose the Hawks needed to make some room for Risacher, and unloading a wing was the way to do so. But it was just a very low price, and I like it a lot for the Rockets of just, adding shooters always help. And, that's one area in Griffin's game that has always been prevalent, is the fact that he is a reliable shot maker. And he was a top recruit coming out of high school as well. So I feel like this is a pretty nice spot for the Rockets to just sort of slide in, and AJ Griffin is easily worth more than the 44th overall pick, so that was a no-brainer for them. I love that move. Talked about it a number of times already. Just stick with what you're doing, Rockets. Don't get stupid on me and end up trading for Kevin Durant, but that's its own thing. And we saw another sort of similar deal. The Raptors acquired Davion Mitchell and Sasha Vezenkov from the Kings in exchange for Jalen McDaniels. This is another recent first-round selection on the move. Mitchell was drafted a couple years ago, 9th overall by the Kings, and this past season he saw his playing time really dip off to just 15 minutes per game. Just never necessarily worked out with the Kings. Obviously he was buried a little bit to some degree when he was behind De'Aaron Fox, but he just never found a role for himself, and this is a situation where the Kings are kind of doing a similar thing to what the Hawks did, and they're just trying to clear out some room in that backcourt for their newest draft pick in Devin Carter. And I like Carter more than I do Mitchell. I was never necessarily huge on him. You know, he was good at Baylor, but with his size, I wasn't really sure how it was going to play at the next level, and that's absolutely a concern you can say about Devin Carter as well. So he is not a lock by any means to be this massive contributor, but I still feel good about the move. Mitchell, plus the fact that you actually get a player that could potentially be something for you in Jalen McDaniels, being a lengthy defender, not to be confused with Jaden McDaniels, but it is his brother who plays a pretty similar style in my eyes, has a lengthy frame as well, so I think it just makes sense. A little bit on both ends. Now the Raptors side is where it gets interesting, because we also have news that this morning the Raptors signed point guard Emmanuel Quickley to a 5-year contract extension worth $175 million. And they have a lot of guards to balance in all of this, where they have Quickley, like we mentioned, just traded for Davion Mitchell. Gary Trent Jr. was the starter for them last year. He opted into his player option for this upcoming season. And now in the past 2 drafts, they have added Jacoby Walter, Jamal Shed, and Grady Dick. Dick is sort of a guard/forward, but still in the guard, conversation. And that's a lot of people to try and balance there. And, Shed was also a late second rounder. I like him a lot. There are definitely concerns with him being an NBA player, so maybe that is something that you just sort of have to let be. Maybe one of them gets moved. Maybe it's Gary Trent, who, that would be a pretty good player as well now that I think about it, for the Dallas Mavericks, just in terms of being able to bring a three-point shot, isn't all too expensive. Maybe I would have liked that one a little bit more if they went expiring contract for expiring contract, but just upgrading with Gary Trent over Tim Hardaway Jr. But, regardless, he's still going to be available. And I don't even think for the Raptors, who are this rebuilding team, I wouldn't be overly concerned about the amount of guards. I don't love it, for sure, but I can get over it because there are still probably moves to be made, and they're just a young team trying to figure out their place, whatever. They do have a lot of very expensive contracts on the books now, where it's $45 million per year to Scotty Barnes minimum. He just signed a contract extension earlier this week. That could reach $55 million per year if he were to make an All-NBA team in some of the coming years. $35 million for Emmanuel Quickley now for the foreseeable future, and they still have RJ Barrett under contract for $25 to $30 million over the course of the next 2-3 years. I think it's 3 years. It's a lot of money to have wrapped up in some players that I don't think I can point to any one of them and say that it is a great deal. Now, I fully supported the Scotty Barnes extension, and I do still feel that way. $45 million a year is a lot, for sure, but at the same time, the Raptors are in this situation where they understand they're a rebuilding team trying to find their way. That money doesn't necessarily mean the same thing to them because it's not like they're this free agent destination, so you spend it. But it's just a lot of money to have wrapped up in 3 players that I don't know how great you can feel about any of them. They're just playing very loose with that philosophy of having money to burn. But again, I understand that they're a ways away from contention anyways, so they probably work things out by the time they actually have to. Last couple pieces of news here. The Nuggets traded Reggie Jackson to the Hornets during the first round of the draft. They made up some of the second round draft capital that they gave away to when they moved up to take Holmes in the first round. This just gives them, again, a little bit of future draft capital, but more than anything, flexibility in terms of this summer, especially with Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, who just the other day declined his player option and is going to be a free agent. KCP is a massive piece of this Nuggets team. He was a really big part of the Lakers in 2020, just one of the best, most applicable role players that any team could ask for. So I'm sure that's going to be a top priority for them. And then the final piece of news that we got today was the Golden State Warriors deciding to pick up the player option of Chris Paul. Today was the deadline, and they are officially doing so. It's going to be a $30 million expiring contract, and I would imagine they're going to try and use that to make a deal with another team and send him out to upgrade for a better player. I was looking at some of the contracts in the NBA for this upcoming season, and some players that just kind of stood out of could they possibly get moved? Jeremy Grant of the Trailblazers, Chris Middleton of the Bucks, of course. Again, I just mentioned it earlier. I kind of doubt that's the case, but just something that stood out to me. I wouldn't say that Middleton is an untouchable. DeAndre Ayton, CJ McCollum, Tyler Hero. I understand that none of those names are super exciting. It could maybe interest you in a Julius Randle, who's at $29 million. I don't think the Knicks are going to trade him, and what are they even going to get from the Warriors in exchange for that? Brandon Ingram is at $36 million, so I don't know if they could maybe make something happen there. Obviously, second luxury tax does put some handicaps on the moves that the Warriors are able to make. And then, generally speaking here, some of the names are better than others. I wouldn't mind seeing Jeremy Grant there, but it is, I don't know how many of them necessarily fully move the needle for the Warriors in terms of being automatic contenders. I do maybe like the idea of Jeremy Grant trying to slide in a deal there. If I were to, again, and I don't have all the details, I don't have the trade machine fired up or anything, but if they made a deal for Jeremy Grant, let's call it Chris Paul, something along the lines of, I honestly don't even know. Chris Paul is obviously the lesser asset, but it's not like Jeremy Grant on that contract is super tantalizing, but maybe they go out and, if they were to get a Jeremy Grant, and then if they were to make a second deal with the Cleveland Cavaliers, who I've long been talking about, I would love Jarrett Allen on the Warriors. He's at $20 million, so I don't think that the Chris Paul and Allen contracts are going to match up, but they could find some sort of way to work out a deal with Cleveland, sending them Andrew Wiggins, maybe some draft capital, maybe some young players. I feel like you could end up in a pretty decent spot there. I don't know, if you're something along the lines of Curry, Brandon Podziemski, Jeremy Grant, Draymond Green, and Jarrett Allen. Now, spacing is a little bit of an issue there, but again, this is sort of an on-the-fly rebuild for the Warriors. I'm just saying maybe they have some options. Chris Paul is going to be traded for sure. I would have to imagine that they're not going to bring him back for $30 million. Giving him to a team like the Trailblazers, which can just buy him out and they pick up some extra assets, would probably be beneficial for them. I don't imagine that a team that is actively trying to compete is going to take on a $30 million deal, but we'll see. It's just curious as to what are the Warriors actually trying to do here? Are you serious about maximizing the rest of Steph Curry's career in Golden State, or are you just going to sort of play around with just having him being a competitive team for the rest of the years and having him retire a Warrior? both are definitely on the table. I'm not super tantalized by that idea of just sort of playing the string out, but we'll see. And for Warriors fans, I understand it's been very fun seeing the development of these young pieces, but at the same time, you can't have everything. You either are contending. We saw, and Warriors fans should know that better than anybody in terms of seeing the two timelines, and now it kind of worked in 2022, but I would argue that the majority of that championship was based off of the more veteran pieces they had, and Steph Curry, maybe with a little splash of Jordan Poole. But let me know what you think in the comments section. Again, I know it just threw out a lot of different topics there, but had to do a little bit of housekeeping before we head into the weekend here. And, there were a number of things that sort of got swept under the rug. But that is all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for tuning into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. Remember to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. Be sure to check us out on social media as well for more exclusive short content. But have yourselves a great weekend. We will be back Monday afternoon at 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern. Take care, and we will see you then.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn.